So great was the horror of his approach that Huon leaped aside. Then Sauron sprang upon Lúthien, and she swooned before the menace of the foul spirit in his eyes, and the foul vapour of his breath. But even as he came, falling she cast a fold of her dark cloak before his eyes, and he stumbled, for a fleeting drowsiness came upon him. Then Huon sprang. There befell the battle of Huon and Wolf Sauron, and the howls and baying echoed in the hills, and the watchers on the walls of Ered Wethrin across the valley heard it afar, and were dismayed. But no wizardry nor spell, neither fang nor venom, nor devil's art, nor beast's strength, could overthrow Huon of Valinor, and he took his foe by the throat and pinned him down. Then Sauron shifted shape from wolf to serpent, and from monster to his own accustomed form. But he could not elude the grip of Huon without forsaking his body utterly. Ere his foul spirit left its dark house, Lúthien came to him, and said that he should be stripped of his raiment of flesh, and his ghost be sent quaking back to Morgoth. And she said, "There, everlastingly, thy naked self shall endure the torment of his scorn, pierced by his eyes, unless thou yield to me the mastery of thy tower." Then Sauron yielded himself, and Lúthien took the mastery of the isle, and all that was there, and Huon released him, and immediately he took the form of a vampire, great as a dark cloud across the moon. And he fled, dripping blood from his throat upon the trees, and came to Tar Nephuin, and dwelt there, filling it with horror. Then Lúthien stood upon the bridge, and declared her power, and the spell was loosed, that bound stone to stone, and the gates were thrown down, and the walls opened, and the pits laid bare. And many thralls and captives came forth in wonder and dismay, shielding their eyes against the pale moonlight, for they had lain long in the darkness of Sauron. But Beren came not. Therefore Huon and Lúthien sought him in the isle, and Lúthien found him mourning by Felagund. So deep was his anguish that he lay still, and did not hear her feet. Then thinking him already dead, she put her arms about him, and fell into a dark forgetfulness. But Beren, coming back to the light out of the pit of despair, lifted her up, and they looked again upon one another, and the day rising over the dark hills shone upon them. They buried the body of Felagund upon the hilltop of his own isle, and it was clean again, and the green grave of Finrod, Finarfin's son, fairest of all the princes of the elves, remained inviolate, until the land was changed and broken, and foundered under destroying seas. But Finrod walks with Finarfin, his father, beneath the trees in Eldamar. Now Beren and Lúthien Tinuviel went free again, and together walked through the woods, renewing for a time their joy. And though winter came, it hurt them not, for flowers lingered where Lúthien went, and the birds sang beneath the snow-clad hills. But Huon, being faithful, went back to Celagorm his master, yet their love was less than before. There was tumult in Nargothrond, for thither now returned many elves that had been prisoners in the Isle of Sauron, and a clamour arose that no words of Celagorm could still. They lamented bitterly the fall of Felagund, their king, saying that a maiden had dared that which the sons of Fëanor had not dared to do. But many perceived that it was treachery rather than fear that had guided Celagorm and Curufin. Therefore the hearts of the people of Nargothrond were released from their dominion, and turned again to the house of Fëanor, and they obeyed Doriath. But he would not suffer them to slay the brothers, as some desired, for the spilling of kindred blood by kin would bind the curse of Mandos more closely upon them all. Yet neither bread nor rest would he grant to Celegorm and Curufin within his realm, and he swore that there should be little love between Nargothrond and the sons of Fëanor thereafter. "Let it be so," said Celegorm, and there was a light of menace in his eyes. But Curufin smiled. Then they took horse and rode away like fire, to find if they might their kindred in the east. But none would go with them, not even those that were of their own people. For all perceived that the curse lay heavily upon the brothers, and that evil followed them. In that time Celebrimbor, the son of Curufin, repudiated the deeds of his father, and remained in Nargothrond. Yet Huon followed still the horse of Celegorm, his master. Northward they rode, for they intended in their haste to pass through Dimbar, and along the north marches of Doriath, seeking the swiftest road to Himring, where Maedhros their brother dwelt, and still they might hope with speed to traverse it, since it lay close to Doriath's borders, shunning Nandan Gortheb and the distant menace of the Mountains of Terror. Now it is told that Beren and Lúthien came in there wandering into the forest of Brethil, and drew near at last to the borders of Doriath. Then Beren took thought of his vow, and against his heart he resolved, when Lúthien was come again within the safety of her own land, to set forth once more. But she was not willing to be parted from him again, saying, "You must choose, Beren, between these two, to relinquish the quest and your oath, and seek a life of wandering upon the face of the earth, or to hold to your word and challenge the power of darkness upon its throne. But on either road I shall go with you, and our doom shall be alike." Even as they spoke together of these things, walking without heed of aught else, Celegorm and Curufin rode up, hastening through the forest. And the brothers espied them, and knew them from afar. Then Celegorm turned his horse, and spurred it upon Beren, purposing to ride him down. But Curufin swerved, stooped, and lifted Lúthien to his saddle, for he was a strong and cunning horseman. Then Beren sprang from before Celegorm full upon the speeding horse of Curufin that had passed him, and the leap of Beren is renowned among men and elves. He took Curufin by the throat from behind, and hurled him backward, and they fell to the ground together. The horse reared and fell, but Lúthien was flung aside, and lay upon the grass. Then Beren throttled Curufin, but death was near him, for Celegorm rode upon him with a spear. In that hour Huon forsook the service of Celegorm, and sprang upon him, so that his horse swerved aside, and would not approach Beren because of the terror of the great hound. Celegorm cursed both hound and horse, but Huon was unmoved. Then Lúthien rising forbade the slaying of Curufin, but Beren despoiled him of his gear and weapons, and took his knife, Engrist. That knife was made by Telkar of Nogrod, and hung sheathless by his side. Iron it would cleave as it were green wood. Then Beren, lifting Curufin, flung him from him, and bade him walk now back to his noble kinsfolk, who might teach him to turn his valour to the worthier use. "Your horse," he said, "I keep for the service of Lúthien, and it may be accounted happy to be free of such a master." Then Curufin cursed Beren under cloud and sky. "Go hence," he said, "unto a swift and bitter death." Celegorm took him beside him on his horse, and the brothers made then as if to ride away. And Beren turned away and took no heed of their words, but Curufin, being filled with shame and malice, took the bow of Celegorm, and shot back as they went, and the arrow was aimed at Lúthien. Huan, leaping, caught it in his mouth, but Curufin shot again, and Beren sprang before Lúthien, and the dart smote him in the breast. It is told that Huan pursued the sons of Fëanor, and they fled in fear, and returning he brought to Lúthien a herb out of the forest. With that leaf she staunched Beren's wound, and by her arts and by her love she healed him, and thus at last they returned to Doriath. There Beren, being torn between his oath and his love, and knowing Lúthien to be now safe, arose one morning before the sun, and committed her to the care of Huan. Then in great anguish he departed while she yet slept upon the grass. He rode northward again with all speed to the pass of Sirion, and coming to the skirts of Tar na Fuin, he looked out across the waste of Anfauglith, and saw afar the peaks of Thengurudrim. There he dismissed the horse of Curufin, and bade it leave now dread and servitude, and run free upon the green grass in the lands of Sirion. Then, being now alone and upon the threshold of the final peril, he made a song of parting, in praise of Lúthien and the lights of heaven, for he believed that he must now say farewell to both love and light. Of that song these words were a part. Farewell, sweet earth and northern sky, for ever blessed since here did lie, and here with lissome limbs did run, beneath the moon, beneath the sun, Lúthien to Nuviel, more fair than mortal tongue can tell, though all to ruin fell the world, and were dissolved and backward hurled, unmade into the old abyss, yet were it making good for this, the dusk, the dawn, the earth, the sea, that Lúthien for a time should be. And he sang aloud, caring not what ear should overhear him, for he was desperate and looked for no escape. But Lúthien heard his song, and she sang in answer, and she came through the woods unlooked for Huan, consenting once more to be her steed, had borne her swiftly hard upon Beren's trail. Long he had pondered in his heart what counsel he could devise for the lightening of the peril of these two whom he loved. He turned aside, therefore, at Sauron's isle, as they ran northward again, and he took thence the ghastly wolf-hame of Draugluin, and the bat fell of Thuringwethil. She was the messenger of Sauron, and was wont to fly in vampire's form to Angband, and her great-fingered wings were barbed at each joint's end with an iron claw. Clad in these dreadful garments, Huan and Lúthien ran through Tar na Fuin, and all things fled before them. Beren, seeing their approach, was dismayed, and he wondered, for he had heard the voice of Tinuvio, and he thought it now a phantom for his ensnaring. But they halted and cast aside their disguise, and Lúthien ran towards him. Thus Beren and Lúthien met again between the desert and the wood. For a while he was silent, and was glad, but after a space he strove once more to dissuade Lúthien from her journey. Thrice now I curse my oath to Thingol, he said, and I would that he had slain me in Menegroth, rather than I should bring you under the shadow of Morgoth. Then for the second time Huan spoke with words, and he counselled Beren, saying, From the shadow of death you can no longer save Lúthien, for by her love she is now subject to it. You can turn from your fate and lead her into exile, seeking peace in vain while your life lasts. But if you will not deny your doom, then either Lúthien, being forsaken, must assuredly die alone, or she must with you challenge the fate that lies before you, hopeless, yet not certain. Further counsel I cannot give, nor may I go further on your road, but my heart forebodes that what you find at the gate I shall myself see. All else is dark to me, yet it may be that our three paths lead back to Doriath, and we may meet before the end." Then Beren perceived that Lúthien could not be divided from the doom that lay upon them both, and he sought no longer to dissuade her. But the counsel of Huan and the arts of Lúthien, he was arrayed now in the hame of Draugluin, and she in the winged fell of Thuringwelthil. Beren became in all things like a werewolf to look upon, save that in his eyes there shone a spirit grim indeed, but clean. And horror was in his glance as he saw upon his flank a bat-like creature clinging with creased wings. Then howling under the moon he leaped down the hill, and the bat wheeled and flitted above him. They passed through all perils, until they came with the dust of their long and weary road upon them to the drear dale that lay before the gate of Angband. Black chasms opened beside the road, whence forms as of writhing serpents issued. On either hand the cliffs stood as embattled walls, and upon them sat carrion fowl crying with fell voices. Before them was the impregnable gate, an arch wide and dark at the foot of the mountain. Above it reared 1,000 feet of precipice. There dismay took them, for at the gate was a guard, of whom no tidings had yet gone forth. Rumour of he knew not what designs abroad among the princes of the elves had come to Morgoth, and ever down the aisles of the forest was heard the baying of Huan, the great hound of war, whom long ago the Valar unleashed. Then Morgoth recalled the doom of Huan, and he chose one from among the whelps of the race of Draugluin, and he fed him with his own hand upon living flesh, and put his power upon him. Swiftly the wolf grew, until he could creep into no den, but lay huge and hungry before the feet of Morgoth. There the fire and anguish of hell entered into him, and he became filled with a devouring spirit, tormented, terrible, and strong. Carcharoth, the Red Ma, he is named in the tales of those days, and Anfauglier, the jaws of thirst. And Morgoth set him to lie unsleeping before the doors of Angband, lest Huan come. Now Carcharoth espied them from afar, and he was filled with doubt, for news had long been brought to Angband that Draugluin was dead. Therefore, when they approached, he denied them entry, and bade them stand. And he drew near with menace, scenting something strange in the air about them. But suddenly some power descended from of old, from divine race, possessed Lúthien, and casting back her foul raiment, she stood forth small before the might of Carcharoth, but radiant and terrible. Lifting up her hand, she commanded him to sleep, saying, "O woe-begotten spirit, fall now into dark oblivion, and forget for a while the dreadful doom of life." And Carcharoth was felled, as though lightning had smitten him. Then Beren and Lúthien went through the gate, and down the labyrinthine stairs, and together wrought the greatest deed that has been dared by elves or men. For they came to the seat of Morgoth in his nethermost hall, that was upheld by horror, lit by fire, and filled with weapons of death and torment. There Beren slunk in wolf's form beneath his throne, but Lúthien was stripped of her disguise by the will of Morgoth, and he bent his gaze upon her. She was not daunted by his eyes, and she named her own name, and offered her service to sing before him, after the manner of a minstrel. Then Morgoth, looking upon her beauty, conceived in his thought an evil lust, and a design more dark than any that had yet come into his heart since he fled from Valinor. Thus he was beguiled by his own malice, for he watched her, leaving her free for a while, and taking secret pleasure in his thought. Then suddenly she eluded his sight, and out of the shadows began a song of such surpassing loveliness, and of such blinding power, that he listened perforce, and a blindness came upon him, as his eyes roamed to and fro, seeking her. All his court were cast down in slumber, and all the fires faded and were quenched. But the Silmarils in the crown on Morgoth's head blazed forth suddenly with a radiance of white flame, and the burden of that crown and of the jewels bowed down his head, as though the world was set upon it, laden with a weight of care, of fear, and of desire, that even the will of Morgoth could not support. Then Lúthien, catching up her winged robe, sprang into the air, and her voice came dropping down like rain into pools profound and dark. She cast her cloak before his eyes, and set upon him a dream, dark as the outer void, where once he walked alone. Suddenly he fell, as a hill sliding in avalanche, and hurled like thunder from his throne, lay prone upon the floors of hell. The iron crown rolled echoing from his head. All things were still. As the dead beast, Beren lay upon the ground, but Lúthien, touching him with her hand, aroused him, and he cast aside the wolf-helm. Then he drew forth the knife Ingrist, and from the iron claws that held it he cut a Silmaril. As he closed it in his hand, the radiance welled through his living flesh, and his hand became as a shining lamp. But the jewel suffered his touch and hurt him not. It came then into Beren's mind that he would go beyond his vow, and bear out of Angband all three of the jewels of Fëanor. But such was not the doom of the Silmarils. The knife Ingrist snapped, and a shard of the blade flying smote the cheek of Morgoth. He groaned and stirred, and all the host of Angband moved in sleep. Then terror fell upon Beren and Lúthien, and they fled, heedless and without disguise, desiring only to see the light once more. They were neither hindered nor pursued, but the gate was held against their going out, for Carcharoth had arisen from sleep, and stood now in wrath upon the threshold of Angband. Before they were aware of him, he saw them, and sprang upon them as they ran. Lúthien was spent, and she had not time nor strength to quell the wolf, but Beren strode forth before her, and in his right hand he held aloft the Silmaril. Carcharoth halted, and for a moment was afraid. "Get you gone and fly," cried Beren, "for here is a fire that shall consume you, and all evil things." And he thrust the Silmaril before the eyes of the wolf. But Carcharoth looked upon that holy jewel, and was not daunted, and the devouring spirit within him awoke to sudden fire, and gaping he took suddenly the hand within his jaws, and he bit it off at the wrist. Then swiftly all his inwards were filled with a flame of anguish, and the Silmaril seared his accursed flesh. Howling, he fled before them, and the walls of the valley of the gate echoed with the clamour of his torment. So terrible did he become in his madness that all the creatures of Morgoth that abode in that valley, or upon any of the roads that led thither, fled far away. For he slew all living things that stood in his path, and burst from the north with ruin upon the world. Of all the terrors that came ever into Beleriand ere Angband's fall, the madness of Carcharoth was the most dreadful, for the power of the Silmaril was hidden within him. Now Beren lay in a swoon within the perilous gate, and death drew nigh him, for there was venom on the fangs of the wolf. Lúthien with her lips drew out the venom, and she put forth her failing power to staunch the hideous wound. But behind her, in the depths of Angband, the rumour grew of great wrath aroused. The hosts of Morgoth were awakened. Thus the quest of the Silmaril was like to have ended in ruin and despair. But in that hour, above the wall of the valley, 3 mighty birds appeared, flying northward with wings swifter than the wind. Among all birds and beasts the wandering and need of Beren had been noised, and Huan himself had bidden all things watch, that they might bring him aid. High above the realm of Morgoth, Thorondor and his vassal soared, and seeing now the madness of the wolf and Beren's fall, they came swiftly down, even as the powers of Angband were released from the toils of sleep. Then they lifted up Lúthien and Beren from the earth, and bore them aloft into the clouds. Below them suddenly thunder rolled, lightnings leaped upward, and the mountains quaked. Fire and smoke belched forth from Thangorodrim, and flaming bolts were hurled far abroad, falling ruinous upon the lands, and the Noldor in Hithlum trembled. But Thorondor took his way far above the earth, seeking the high roads of heaven, where the sun day long shines unveiled, and the moon walks amid the cloudless stars. Thus they passed swiftly over Dor Newfauglith, and over Tar Nufuin, and came above the hidden valley of Tumladen. No cloud nor mist lay there, and looking down, Lúthien saw far below, as a white light starting from a green jewel, the radiance of Gondolin, the fair where Turgon dwelt. But she wept, for she thought that Beren would surely die. He spoke no word, nor opened his eyes, and knew thereafter nothing of his flight. And at the last the eagles set them down upon the borders of Doriath, and they were come to that same dell whence Beren had stolen in despair, and left Lúthien asleep. There the eagles laid her at Beren's side, and returned to the peaks of Chrysaegrim and their high eyries. But Huan came to her, and together they tended Beren, even as before, when she healed him of the wound that Curufin gave to him. But this wound was fell and poisonous. Long Beren lay, and his spirit wandered upon the dark borders of death, knowing ever an anguish that pursued him from dream to dream. Then suddenly, when her hope was almost spent, he awoke again, and looked up, seeing leaves against the sky, and he heard beneath the leaves singing soft and slow beside him, Lúthien to Nubia, and it was spring again. Thereafter Beren was named Irkemion, which is the one-handed, and suffering was graven in his face. But at last he was drawn back to life by the love of Lúthien, and he arose, and together they walked in the wood once more. And they did not hasten from that place, for it seemed fair to them. Lúthien indeed was willing to wander in the wild without returning, forgetting house and people, and all the glory of the elf kingdoms. And for a time Beren was content, But he could not for long forget his oath to return to Menegroth, nor would he withhold Lúthien from Thingol forever. For he held by the law of men, deeming it perilous to set at naught the will of the Father, save at the last need. And it seemed also to him unfit that one so royal and fair as Lúthien should live always in the woods, as the rude hunters among men, without home or honour, or the fair things which are the delight of the queens of the Elderlia. Therefore, after a while he persuaded her, and their footsteps forsook the houseless lands, and he passed into Doriath, leading Lúthien home. So their doom wielded. Upon Doriath evil days had fallen. Grief and silence had come upon all its people when Lúthien was lost. Long they had sought for her in vain, and it is told that in that time J.R.R the minstrel of Thingol strayed from the land and was seen no more. He it was that made music for the dance and song of Lúthien before Beren came to Doriath, and he had loved her, and set all his thought of her in his music. He became the greatest of all the minstrels of the elves east of the sea, named even before Magnor, son of Fëanor. But seeking for Lúthien in despair, he wandered upon strange paths, and passing over the mountains, he came into the east of Middle-earth, where for many ages he made lament beside dark waters for Lúthien, daughter of Thingol, most beautiful of all living things. In that time Thingol turned to Melian, but now she withheld her counsel from him, saying that the doom that he had devised must work to its appointed end, and that he must wait now upon time. But Thingol learned that Lúthien had journeyed far from Doriath. For messages came secretly from Celegorm, as has been told, saying Felagund was dead, and Beren was dead, but Lúthien was in Nargothrond, and that Celegorm would wed her. Then Thingol was wrathful, and he sent forth spies, thinking to make war upon Nargothrond, and thus he learned that Lúthien was again fled, and that Celegorm and Culdafin were driven from Nargothrond. Then his counsel was in doubt, for he had not the strength to assail the 7 sons of Fëanor. But he sent messengers to Himring to summon their aid in seeking for Lúthien, since Celegorm had not sent her to the house of her father, nor had he kept her safely. But in the north of his realm his messengers met with a peril sudden and unlooked for, the onslaught of Carcharoth, the wolf of Angband. In his madness he had run ravening from the north, and passing at length over Tar-Nufuin, upon its eastern side, he came down from the sources of Esgalduin like a destroying fire. Nothing hindered him, and the might of Melian upon the borders of the land stayed him not, for fate drove him, and the power of the Silmaril that he bore to his torment. Thus he burst into the inviolate woods of Doriath, and all fled away in fear. Alone of the messengers Mablung, chief captain of the king, escaped, and he brought the dread tidings to Thingol. Even in that dark hour Beren and Lúthien returned, hastening from the west, and the news of their coming went before them like a sound of music borne by the wind into dark houses where men sit sorrowful. They came at last to the gates of Menegroth, and a great host followed them. Then Beren led Lúthien before the throne of Thingol her father, and he looked in wonder upon Beren, whom he had thought dead. But he loved him not, because of the woes that he had brought upon Doriath. But Beren knelt before him, and said, I return according to my word. I am come now to claim my own. And Thingol answered, "What of your quest, and of your vow?" But Beren said, "It is fulfilled. Even now a Silmaril is in my hand." Then Thingol said, "Show it to me." And Beren put forth his left hand, slowly opening its fingers, but it was empty. Then he held up his right arm, and from that hour he named himself Gemlost, the empty-handed. Then Thingol's mood was softened, and Beren sat before his throne upon the left, and Lúthien upon the right. And they told all the tale of the quest, while all three listened and were filled with amazement. And it seemed to Thingol that this man was unlike all other mortal men, and among the great in ardour, and the love of Lúthien a thing new and strange, and he perceived that their doom might not be withstood by any power of this world. Therefore at the last he yielded his will, and Beren took the hand of Lúthien before the throne of her father. But now a shadow fell upon the joy of Doriath at the return of Lúthien the Fair. For learning of the cause of the madness of Carcharoth, the people grew the more afraid, perceiving that his danger was fraught with dreadful power because of the holy jewel, and hardly might be overthrown. And Beren, hearing of the onslaught of the wolf, understood that the quest was not yet fulfilled. Therefore, since daily Carcharoth drew nearer to Menegroth, they prepared the hunting of the wolf, of all pursuits of beasts whereof tales tell the most perilous. To that cause went Huan, the hound of Valinor, and Mablung of the heavy hand, and Beleg strongbow, and Beren Irkemian, and Thingol king of Doriath. They rode forth in the morning, and passed over the river Esgalduin, but Lúthien remained behind at the gates of Menegroth. A dark shadow fell upon her, and it seemed to her that the sun had sickened and turned black. The hunters turned east and north, and following the course of the river, they came at last upon Carcharoth, the wolf, in a dark valley, down the northern side whereof Esgalduin fell in a torrent over steep falls. At the foot of the falls Carcharoth drank to ease his consuming thirst, and he howled, and thus they were aware of him. But he, espying their approach, rushed not suddenly to attack them. It may be that the devil's cunning of his heart awoke, being for a moment eased of his pain by the sweet waters of Esgalduin. And even as they rode towards him, he slunk aside into a deep brake, and there lay hid. But they set a guard about all that place, and waited, and the shadows grew long in the forest. Beren stood beside Thingol, and suddenly they were aware that Huan had left their side. Then a great baying awoke in the thicket, for Huan, becoming impatient, and desiring to look upon this wolf, had gone in alone to dislodge him. But Carcharoth avoided him, and bursting from the thorns, leaped suddenly upon Thingol. Swiftly Beren strode before him with a spear, but Carcharoth swept it aside and felled him, biting at his breast. In that moment Huan leaped from the thicket upon the back of the wolf, and they fell together fighting bitterly, and no battle of wolf and hound has been like to it. For in the baying of Huan was heard the voice of the horns of Orome, and the wrath of the Valar. But in the howls of Carcharoth was the hate of Morgoth, and malice crueler than teeth of steel. And the rocks were rent by their clamour, and fell from on high, and choked the falls of Esgalduin. There they fought to the death. But Thingol gave no heed, for he knelt by Beren, seeing that he was sorely hurt. Huon in that hour slew Carcharoth, but there, in the woven woods of Doriath, his own doom, long spoken, was fulfilled, and he was wounded mortally, and the venom of Morgoth entered into him. Then he came, and falling beside Beren, spoke for the third time with words, and he bade Beren farewell before he died. Beren spoke not, but laid his hand upon the head of the hound, and so they parted. Mablung and Beleg came hastening to the king's aid, but when they looked upon what was done, they cast aside their spears and wept. Then Mablung took a knife and ripped up the belly of the wolf, and within he was well nigh all consumed as with a fire. But the hand of Beren that held the jewel was yet incorrupt. But when Mablung reached forth to touch it, the hand was no more, and the Silmaril lay there unveiled, and the light of it filled the shadows of the forest all about them. Then quickly and in fear Mablung took it and set it in Beren's living hand, and Beren was aroused by the touch of the Silmaril, and held it aloft, and bade Thingol receive it. Now is the quest achieved, he said, and my doom full wrought. And he spoke no more. They bore back Beren Gemlost, son of Barahir, upon a bier of branches, with Huon, the wolf-hound, at his side. And night fell ere they returned to Menegroth. At the feet of Hidilorn, the great beach, Lúthien met them walking slow, and some bore torches beside the bier. There she set her arms about Beren and kissed him, bidding him await her beyond the western sea. And he looked up on her eyes ere the spirit left him. But the starlight was quenched, and darkness had fallen even upon Lúthien Tinuvia. Thus ended the quest of the Silmaril, but the lay of Lethion, released from bondage, does not end. For the spirit of Beren, at her bidding, tarried in the halls of Mandos, unwilling to leave the world until Lúthien came to say her last farewell upon the dim shores of the outer sea, whence men that die set out never to return. But the spirit of Lúthien fell down into darkness, and at last it fled, and her body lay like a flower that is suddenly cut off and lies for a while unwithered on the grass. Then a winter, as it were the hoar age of mortal men, fell upon Thingol. But Lúthien came to the halls of Mandos, where are the appointed places of the old Valir, beyond the mansions of the west, upon the confines of the world. There those that wait sit in the shadow of their thought. But her beauty was more than their beauty, and her sorrow deeper than their sorrows. And she knelt before Mandos, and sang to him. The song of Lúthien before Mandos was the song most fair that ever in words was woven, and the song most sorrowful that ever the world shall hear. Unchanged, imperishable, it is sung still in Valinor, beyond the hearing of the world, and listening the Valar are grieved. For Lúthien wove two themes of words, of the sorrow of the Eldar and the grief of men, of the two kindreds that were made by Ilúvatar to dwell in Arda, the kingdom of earth, amid the innumerable stars. And as she knelt before him, her tears fell upon his feet like rain upon the stones, and Mandos was moved to pity, who never before was so moved, nor has been since, Therefore he summoned Beren, and even as Lúthien had spoken in the hour of his death, they met again beyond the western sea. But Mandos had no power to withhold the spirits of men that were dead within the confines of the world, after their time of waiting, nor could he change the fates of the children of Ilúvatar. He went therefore to Manwë, lord of the Valar, who governed the world under the hand of Ilúvatar, and Manwë sought counsel in his inmost thought, where the will of Ilúvatar was revealed. These were the choices that he gave to Lúthien. Because of her labours and her sorrow, she should be released from Mandos, and go to Valimar, there to dwell unto the world's end among the Valar, forgetting all griefs that her life had known. Thither Beren could not come, for it was not permitted to the Valar to withhold death from him, which is the gift of Ilúvatar to men. But the other choice was this, that she might return to Middle-earth and take with her Beren, there to dwell again, but without certitude of life or joy. Then she would become mortal, and subject to a second death, even as he, and ere long she would leave the world for ever, and her beauty became only a memory in song. This doom she chose, forsaking the blessed realm, and putting aside all claim to kinship with those that dwell there, that thus, whatever grief might lie in wait, the fates of Beren and Lúthien might be joined, and their paths lead together beyond the confines of the world. So it was that alone of the elder Lear, she has died indeed, and left the world long ago. Yet in her choice the two kindreds have been joined, and she is the forerunner of many in whom the Eldar see yet, though all the world is changed, the likeness of Lúthien the beloved, whom they have lost.